Imagine that you're playing D&D, but everyone is a wizard who can only cast Wish, and when casting Wish, they can only use words that they frantically find in their spellbook within a few seconds. That's what this game is. What if I told you that this was a character sheet? You might not be able to tell, but this is an old copy of the Fellowship of the Ring. In my first video, we turned a Rubik's Cube into a role-playing game. I think the whole encoded puzzle box thing is pretty cool, like it has this vibe that matches a futuristic, speculative sci-fi theme. But it also didn't really work for traditional fantasy adventure, or at least I couldn't think of a way to make it work. And honestly, that's really what I want. And literally, while I was looking around for something else that could be a character sheet, I saw a bookshelf where there's plenty of fantasy, including the granddaddy of modern fantasy that inspires pretty much every single fantasy adventure RPG that's ever been made. So this is a book, obviously, and not a character sheet. But we made a character sheet out of a Rubik's Cube, and this is way closer to a character sheet than that is, so I think this is a pretty solid candidate for turning into a role-playing game. I mean, not like that. I mean literally, turn the physical book in my hand, or another book that's in yours, into a character sheet and a role-playing game. Let's think about this the same way we did before, because the basic element we need is still something that encodes randomized information. Encoding information is already taken care of, because if you didn't know, this book is full of words. Words encode information. So that's convenient. Except what's not convenient, actually, is that there's so many words. The Rubik's Cube actually makes things pretty easy because there's just 6 colors and 6 sides. Whereas the book has a lot more than 6 words. But maybe that's something we can work with. Especially if we want randomization. It says Strider. How about that? I'm sure you can think of lots of ways to encode and randomize information from a fantasy novel, and I would love to hear about them in the comments. But what we have here is a way to randomly generate an enormous variety of descriptive, evocative words. That is a really powerful tool to work with. Because, speaking of evocative, what do you think of when a fantasy adventurer opens a book to do something adventurous? I'm gonna cast a spell. Okay, let's back up. How am I going to use this to create a character for a role-playing game? The opportunity that we have to take advantage of is a huge possibility space for a character and the game. Basically, every book can be its own roll table with tens or hundreds of thousands of results, or practically infinite results if we're combining words. But what we lose is the mechanical ability to constrain that into something coherent. Cube AI could use its rules to turn the limited colors and sides of the cube into a coherent idea. And D&D does the same with hundreds of pages of rules that turn your character into a fantasy adventurer. But as far as I can figure it, with this fantasy novel game, any attempt to cohere things mechanically with the rules of the game is going to require conventional character sheet elements, and the more we do that, the more it begs the question of why we're dealing with the whole fantasy novel thing to begin with. But mechanical design isn't the only option here. We can instead cohere the game by using the first and most important part of RPG design. Well, if we're going to stick with just using the book, which is what I want to do, I think it can do the job by itself as long as it's constrained by thematic parameters. By which I mean that the game decides something about the player characters before the players do. I only touched on this in the Cube AI video, but it's what I'm going to say over and over again is the most important part of role-playing game design. And that is theme. Literally nothing about a role-playing game's design, mechanical or otherwise, can work without evoking a strong, coherent, compelling fantasy that the group buys into. The group of fantasy adventurers going on a quest is so ingrained in us now that we kind of think of it as featureless normality. Which is why when I first talked about turning a Rubik's Cube or a fantasy novel into role-playing games, the first thing that I, and probably you, thought of was a game with a party of fantasy adventurers. But I don't think that's quite gonna work here. despite the book I'm holding. Like, I don't think I'm going to be able to use this book to make a game that really serves the fantasy of being a raging barbarian or a charming rogue. Like the Rubik's Cube, it needs a theme that fits the mechanical constraints that come with the medium, but that also allow it to do something that other mediums can't. Which is why the theme that I went with is Hapless Wizard Apprentices. You're probably wondering how we can determine these apprentices' intelligence and wisdom levels and what schools of magic they're studying. No. I do not think that these wizards are out there slaying monsters. These are novice wizards with an emphasis on hapless, as in unusually unlucky and in over their heads with magical shenanigans. They're not the ones solving all the problems with magic. They're the ones accidentally creating the problems that they then need to solve, which they then usually solve with bigger magical problems. They do have stats, I think. I just want us to rethink what we think of as stats. Because if this is their character sheet, and the words inside are what encode information about them, then each character is as unique as their book, or their grimoire. Every author has their own style, and every book has its own tone, so if I'm playing a hapless wizard apprentice with the Fellowship of the Ring, then there may be likely to be careful, virtuous, or warm. And those are stats, you know? They're not numerical stats or reliably consistent stats, but if we already know that the character is comically bad at what they're trying to do, we don't really need to care about rating them. Instead, we can care about other things more, like their personality. This can be a game where your biggest decision in character creation is whether you use Tolkien or Pratchett. But enough playing coy. What is this game, and how does it work? Well, the game is called The Apprentices' Grimoire, and it's available as a free download from my Patreon for free members and a drive-thru RPG. Links in the description. It's a very simple game. It's only 6 pages long, so I could probably explain all the rules here, but like with Cube AI, the thing that I really care about is how the theme and mechanics come together to create a dramatic moment. And a dramatic moment in The Apprentices' Grimoire looks like this. Scorch, flames, fortunately. Silence, master, strangely. If you've played D&D before, and you probably have, then those sound a lot like spells. What do? I don't know. I'm just the apprentice. You're supposed to be the one telling me. Really, it's the entire group together that tells what these spells do, or a game master if you have one. And it's almost certainly not what the wizard apprentice expected or wanted. Basically, imagine that you're playing D&D, but everyone is a wizard who can only cast Wish, and when casting Wish, they can only use words that they frantically find in their spellbook within a few seconds. That's what this game is. I did eventually decide to add a sheet element in that after you cast a spell, you write the words down and can cast that same spell again whenever you want. But that has definitely made the game better, especially when we had an apprentice who was able to magically peer into the past, but every time he did, he grew a bigger and longer beard. Really though, this is the most fun part. You and your friends keep making up some ridiculous situation for your poor apprentices to be in, and looking for words in the book to inspire you, until you figure, I've got to do something to get us out of this, and that is when you open your book to cast a spell. Prepare darkness tremblingly. Follow anxiety cautiously. Delight troll merrily. Alright, I want like a really weird one. And that's kind of thing, like, with other books you can get like really kind of quirky things, but this is pretty straightforward, so this is the style that the book brings. I love doing this, especially with the quirkier books that come up with like the beard spell, you know? And this is basically the whole game. If you play The Apprentices' Grimoire, which you could do tonight, please tell me about the spells you cast. Like, come back here and comment on the video about the crazy spells that you get up to. It is just about the simplest game you could make using a book as the character sheet, so please also let me know if you come up with anything else, because I'd love to hear about it too. Alright, I gotta get something weirder. I'll be right back. Alright, let's give Dostoevsky a try. Here we go. Much better. Strike unexpectedness magnificently. Strike unexpectedness magnificently. What does that mean? I don't know. We'll figure it out. Hang corpse constantly. Consider man awkwardly. People probably cast that spell all the time.